All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my very, very first LinkedIn Live session. Very exciting to have approval for that the other day. So I was thinking we could get started when we get some people in. We could start maybe discussing where you're watching from. That could be a good way to get everyone introduced. And then other than that, I think I'll wait a little bit of time to just let some people get in and see if we get any guests coming in. Cool. So we may as well get started anyway. So I have, for my very first guest on the show, I have a very, very special guest, and I'm going to bring her in now. And this is Kate McDermott. So Kate, it would be good if maybe you could just start by introducing yourself to everybody, what you do and what your experiences is.
Yep, sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Kate, and I work as a managing consultant for a niche recruitment agency called Blue Pelican. I've been there for, it'll be 15 years in March next year, so a very long time. And I specialise in data, broadly speaking. So predominantly analytics, data science, data strategy. So yeah, I look after a team of people. We cover all of those areas, and I'm a part of a wider team there as well. We cover kind of other areas in marketing. Yeah, so I really love my job. As you can tell, I've been there for a very long time and very passionate about what I do. Yeah. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be on the live today. Thanks so much for the invite.
Yes, no, thanks for joining. And the reason that I brought Kate on was that, so with the LinkedIn Lives that I'm looking to do, it's all going to be based around the theme of helping, helping aspiring data scientists progress their career. So whether that is getting into the field and thinking about and learning about what it is you need to know and maybe the things that you don't need to know. So getting into data science is something that when you come in, it's like a wave of things that you're told you need to learn. And there's some things which are more important to hiring managers and less important to hiring managers. So I might look to speak to some hiring managers from some of the companies that a lot of people want to work for. So I've got some great contacts at Amazon. I might try and look to get some contacts at Facebook and Google and talk to hiring managers for data scientists there and ask them exactly how does your hiring process work and what are the types of things that you're looking for and maybe what differentiates successful candidates versus those candidates that unfortunately miss out. And hopefully that'll help you sort of feel more confident going forward into your data science career, looking for the jobs that you want. And then the other side of that is even before that, thinking about how do I sell myself to recruiters or to hiring managers. And that's the very reason that I brought Kate onto the show, was because I saw a couple of her videos, and we've been in touch a little bit in the past for various projects, but I noticed a couple of her videos relating to data science CVs and what you should do and what you maybe shouldn't do in terms of how you want to get noticed and how you want to sell yourself. So I saw those and they aligned really closely with what I've been talking about in Data Science Infinity. So I thought this could be a really good opportunity to discuss this, because I know there's so many aspiring data scientists that want a little bit more sort of the inside word on what it is to get noticed, or even to get past that recruiter, because they see the recruiter is that point that sits between them and them getting in that interview chair. So if we can get some advice from somebody like Kate, who just does this day in, day out, and she's very, very clued up on the data side of it, I think that's going to be really useful for you guys. So that's why I brought Kate in. Ask any questions at all. Absolutely, we're happy to answer questions for you. But I think I might start with one which makes sense to maybe frame the rest of our conversation, especially at the moment, and that is, what's the data science job market like at the moment? So obviously the last 6 or 7 months has been a bit of a funny time for everybody. What's changed and what's not changed, and what should people be looking to do to keep progressing themselves forward?
Yeah, great question. One that I've been answering on an almost daily basis for the last, what are we now? God, 9 months into this. Yeah, I think the real key takeaway for me, and this has been feedback particularly from my clients, is that the data market, I mean, it's, it was a hugely growing area anyway of the general jobs market. Data has been a really appealing industry area for a lot of people to move into in recent years. It's just grown and grown and grown. But it's become even more important now for companies to leverage their data assets and use data to really genuinely inform and drive the decisions that they're making about what does my customer now look like, post-COVID? How do we engage with that customer? What do they need? What does my business need to do to adapt to this situation? So, a lot of people that I've been talking to, their roles have diversified and have changed over the last 6 to 9 months because they've had to start using their skills in different ways and to answer different questions for their stakeholders or for their clients. So I think, data really has come to the forefront of the skills that are in demand, along with digital, which, links in really nicely and for obvious reasons. But data is even more important than it once was, and businesses are taking it, I think, a lot more seriously and are prioritizing the recruitment that they're trying to do for their business. They're particularly prioritizing data roles, and those are really the roles that are classed now as business critical. So a lot of clients that I have that are putting recruitment freezes in place are actually making exceptions to those rules for their data roles. So the job market, I mean, this is really, I can really only talk about the UK, but the job market in the UK, it's been a very jarring experience for the last 6 to 9 months because COVID has affected every business in a different way. It's not like the recession in 2008 that I worked through, which, was you could forecast within that, you could predict it, and it affected every business in the same way. And there were lots of redundancies going on everywhere. But there are pockets of opportunity, well, certainly where during COVID, in the lockdown over here and post-lockdown. And so there are lots of businesses that are flourishing and, again, looking to really build on the existing analytical teams that they had in place. So, data science skill sets, analytical skill sets are in very high demand. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's a buoyant market. There's still a lot of caution around recruitment. But as I say, businesses are prioritising making hires in data science, digital analytics, broader analytics. So there are lots of pockets of opportunity. You just have to know where to look. And I can be specific about the industry areas, I think, that I've seen hiring in those kind of skill areas, if that's useful.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned the 2008 financial crisis. So when I first came to London, it was about 2009, and I was coming in when that was still taking an impact, and it was similar to what you mentioned there. That so my first role was like an insights analyst at Sainsbury's, and that the recruitment, the people in recruitment that I talked to were saying the same sort of thing, that a lot of areas are struggling, but businesses still really, really want and need to know what are their customers thinking and what are their customers doing. So those roles, analyst roles or data science roles, they were still in such demand. So it didn't really hit that area because there was this thirst for knowledge around how do we plan for the next steps? How do we make the decisions going forward? And you need people looking at the data to do that. So it's fortunate in that regard that we work in that area, or a lot of us work in that area. So my question, following off what you were saying there, is there a difference in terms of junior roles and senior roles and mid-level roles? Are they are they being affected at the same rate, or are there less junior roles? Is there a difference between levels?
It's a really good question. I actually had that question from a candidate literally just this morning. Funnily enough, I was speaking to a lady who's a kind of head of level within analytics. I would say I've seen far more activity from junior through to kind of senior or lead analyst level. My personal opinion is that, there was a lot of restructuring that went on within businesses across management level and above at the beginning of lockdown. A lot of big brands, a lot of big businesses in the UK were restructuring anyway. It's just a cyclical thing that tends to happen that we see with a lot of the big players that we work with. So we saw a kind of flurry of activity on the candidate market in terms of heads of managerial level individuals coming onto the market kind of in the middle of lockdown. So kind of late spring, early summer. And most of those people, I say most of them, a lot of those people have now secured new positions within the businesses that suddenly decided to really invest in data. It took them a while, a lot of direct attraction kind of models being adhered to here in the UK rather than using recruiters like us. So it did take them a few months to actually secure those positions. But I think, most people who are in jobs at the moment at senior level are just looking to stay in their roles for the moment, rather than really go out and actively start searching for new positions. I think you've got obviously you've got the end of the furlough scheme here in the UK coming up at the end of October. I don't think you're going to suddenly see a ton of, senior level people who are on furlough coming into the market. I think that scheme was more appropriate for people at the kind of slightly lower levels. So I don't think that part of the market will change. I am seeing vacancies out there for head of level. There's never that many at that kind of level anyway, So I think that's kind of an atypical kind of it's the way that the market kind of works anyway. But there are definitely the volume kind of vacancies that we've had in data have been, as I say, kind of junior through to senior or lead level. Businesses looking to bolster their teams, recognizing they need more kind of resource on the ground in order to tackle the questions that they have, or to provide solutions for the problems that they have. And that was another point I was going to make, a slightly different point, but I think it's, rather than level, I think the skill sets that are in demand within data science and analytics are for those that can solve problems using data. It's, at the moment, businesses aren't investing in new tech. They're not investing in potentially, expanding their product portfolio on an R&D basis. There's less kind of work being done in that sense. It's more immediate, how can we become more profitable, more efficient? And so if you can help a business solve problems using your data science or analytical skill set, I think that is of huge value at the moment, and that's how you should be promoting yourself.
Yeah, and that's something that I wanted to discuss with you as well, I think. And we'll do that in a second. I think that leads us more to the types of things that you can do as an aspiring data scientist, or an aspiring data scientist, or somebody that wants to move forward in their career, is how you sell yourself. And the very first selling point, I guess, is your CV. And I want to discuss that in a second. I do just want to bring up a couple of comments that people have here. So we've got Ayush here. Hi, Andrew and Kate. Ayush is great. I talk to him about cricket all the time, so good to have you here. We've got Gigi from Amazon is here. So I worked with Gigi for a number of years. So when I was at Amazon, I think I did something like just over 100 interviews, and that to me seemed like a lot. But I think Gigi must have done something like 350. So she is incredibly experienced at interviewing, and she's actually known as the Amazon interview whiz, I believe it is. She's got a YouTube channel. So if you are looking to get a role at Amazon, I don't think there's a better resource, and it's for inside knowledge on how they interview, than talking to Gigi. So go follow her on LinkedIn and go and find her YouTube channel, because that is like the inside word of how to get a role at Amazon. And we do have a lot of other questions coming in here. What shall we look at? We've got a quick one here, which is, what programming languages beside Python should I take? I mean, I can talk to that a little bit. Kate, probably good to get your view on that as well. So for me, generally speaking, for most data science roles, there's two things you need. You probably need to know SQL. That's so critical, because as much as what we see on LinkedIn is about deep learning and the amazing cutting edge technologies that are coming out, 95%, even not 99% of companies are still trying to get to grips with their data and solve problems simply. And most of these companies have their data sitting in relational databases, and they need you to be able to access and manipulate the data using SQL. So that is almost without doubt a must-have. That's almost like the first thing, even though it's not as sexy as Python or R, it is an absolute must-have. And it's a really intuitive language to learn, so anybody can pick that up quite quickly. So I would definitely say learn SQL. And then in terms of Python, I learned R first. So I started with SAS, and then I learned R, and now I've learned Python. And I have no problem with anyone using R or Python. I don't enter that debate around which is better. My personal view is that Python might be able to open a few more doors for you, so it's slightly more popular on job descriptions for data science roles. And in some cases, and some roles, it can help you interact and work better with teams like data engineering teams, who are more likely to be familiar with Python than they are with R. So that's why. So in Data Science Infinity, I teach SQL and I teach Python. I don't teach R, even though I think it's a fantastic language and I absolutely love it. I focus on SQL and Python. Is there anything you'd add to that, Kate, based on what you're seeing on job descriptions?
I would just concur. Yeah, you always get a preference, I think, with programming languages, and yeah, obviously, I mean, SAS was the market leader for many years, but that really has, I mean, that's non-existent now, pretty much, within the areas that I deal in, and Python is the most popular programming tool that we see on job descriptions versus R. When they both entered the UK market, we weren't sure which one was going to take preference, but yeah, the feedback I've heard from people is that, as you say, there's possibly it's a slightly more flexible tool. You can do a little bit more with it, but I would absolutely agree with you. SQL is your fundamental, plus Python is 95% of the time the brief that we get. We do get, again, it depends on who your employer that you're working with, your client that you're working with. Most of them will say to me, if they've used SQL and R and they've got the right experience and they're a good quality fit, we can train them on Python. It's not a problem. They understand how to use a programming language. So a lot of employers are flexible. So if you're applying for jobs and you're an expert in R, but you've not used Python and it's on the advert, I would apply anyway. I'd say the two skill sets are fairly interchangeable.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said there as well. So if you know R really well, but you haven't learned Python yet, I wouldn't let that hold you back from applying for a job that says Python, because if I'm interviewing a candidate and I don't particularly care that you don't remember the exact Python syntax for some process. All I want to see is your thought process from how you would go through a project or solve a problem from inception right through to implementation, say. And I'd rather you told me the steps that you'd take and the considerations you'd make at each point, rather than the specific coding syntax. That means nothing to me. I've been coding Python for a long time now, and I cannot remember anything by heart. I sit on Google, like I have a Python script open and I have Google open, and I do it like that. If I went into a coding test where I had to code from scratch, I would fail, absolutely. But as long as you know what you need to do to solve a problem, that's got to be the most important thing. And I think from feedback I get from candidates, I think that's missing in a lot of interview processes. I think some interviewers are misguided in thinking that they need people to know the precise coding language or the precise tools, and these things can be learned. It's more around your way of thinking and your way of solving a problem that's crucial to me. And I wish more and more interviewers would understand that, because they're going to get so much more value from, or they're going to bring in better candidates, I think, that way. But that's a personal opinion. Anyway, so I wanted to discuss CVs, because I wanted that to be quite a big part of our discussion, because I get so many questions from people around their CVs. And from all of the CVs that I see from people, and I try and review them for them and give my input on what they can change. I think most people don't need to make wholesale changes. They're so close. It's just some subtle, small changes which can make a huge impact to set you apart. So in your view, what's some really important but maybe quite subtle tweaks and changes that people can make to their CV to make them stand out from the crowd?
It's all about context. That is the key thing. And this applies to when you're in an interview situation as well, and you're framing up your answer to a question. You need to think about your accountability in that role and what you own. And also you need to demonstrate that you understand the impact of your work on the wider business, or on how the stakeholder you're working with then use that insight or model or product, whatever it is that you've built or delivered, solution, how they've then used that and taken that on and then applied that in a business context. And ideally, if you can give a kind of demonstrable, tangible result, achievement, improvement, it demonstrates that you, as you talked about as well, that your thought process is one of, okay, I've got a problem here, or I've got a brief, I need to figure out the best way to solve that. So I need to explain, what kind of tools, techniques, methodologies I used and why. Why did I pick those? Why did I decide that was the best way to do it, not the quickest or the easiest? and then how I worked with somebody else to get that delivered. And actually, I've then taken an interest in how that's affected either the bottom line of my business, or how it's helped make an improvement, or demonstrated some kind of efficiency. It just sets you apart from those really prescriptive analysts and data scientists, and putting that down on paper and bringing that to life is really difficult. And also, I think people assume that the reader will make a number of assumptions, and a lot of the time they will, and it's really only, I think, in recent years, as the data science market has started to develop and we've started to see people who are really strong with their interpersonal skills, their relationship building skills, their problem solving skills, go into that market and choose to work in very consultative or business facing positions. It started to become more and more important that you demonstrate that, and our clients are becoming far more fastidious about what's on the CV, because again, naturally a lot of people that work in technical positions are really excited and passionate about all of the money and the time that they've spent on learning these incredibly complex and advanced processes, around mathematics and statistics and machine learning and computer science. But, we will make a number of assumptions if we see that you've studied, a particular subject and you've worked at a particular business. But that's not enough. It is a very crowded market these days. It really is not. It's not a candidate short market anymore like it used to be. So it really is up to you guys to think about how to make yourself more attractive. And as I say, it's about bringing to life the work that you do and providing the context. So you can follow a very, very simple process in order to inject a few extra pieces of information into your bullet points that you will have put beneath your job title. And there's an approach that we advise people to use in interview, particularly if they're going into competency-based interviews, which is the STAR approach, which stands for situation, task, action, and result. And it's the process that we've both just referenced. It's giving your interviewer or your reader the reason for the project that you embarked on, or the piece of work that you did. So why did you start doing that? What was the problem that you identified? Or what was the brief that you took from the stakeholder? How did you then go about formulating your approach, your strategy, your methodology? What did you use? What techniques, what tools did you use to deliver that? And what was the output of that? And you can summarize that in a couple of sentences. It doesn't have to be lengthy. And that is the key thing, is getting into the habit of being able to succinctly articulate those 4 points. And it does take practice, both verbally and, in written word. But when I have a CV come through and it's talking about tangible results, and I've got percentage returns, and I've got, somebody who's proud of the achievements that they've made, it just sings from the page. It's exciting to read. It makes you want to talk to that person, because it really does set them apart from a really technically heavy CV that is referencing all these fancy tools and techniques, but you don't really know what the value add was. So context is the most important thing for me on a CV, and it is, as I say, that doesn't equate to hundreds of extra words, as you say. It's a couple of little extra tweaks, and it is a skill, I think, being able to kind of get that down on paper. But I've done a video which gives you examples of before and after, so hopefully that will help people to understand what I mean, because sometimes it's even difficult for me to try and articulate that.
Yeah, and I'll link to your profile afterwards, and people can go and find those videos, because I've watched them and they are really, really good. But I completely agree. I think the STAR format, so the STAR format that you mentioned, so I know when I was interviewing at Amazon, that was heavily pushed as something to try and look for in people's answers, and Sony as well. It's the same. It just makes sense, really, doesn't it? You're giving some context. You're telling people what it was you did. You're saying how you did it, and then you're saying what the results are. And that in itself, like you say, that could be 3 sentences, and that's all it needs to be. But it gives the hiring manager what they need to know. And it is a tricky balance, because your CV is essentially you can almost think of it as your passport to getting from sitting at home into the interview chair. but you want to include so much, but you can't include everything. So you've got to try and distill it down to the most powerful description of what you did, but making sure that you do say exactly what happened afterwards. So what was the point of all this at the end of the day? Because when you're a hiring manager, you're not, and this is something I say in the Data Science Infinity course over and over again, and people in the course are going to get bored of me saying it, but I think it's so true, is that nobody's going to pay you. They're not going to give you money. In 99.9% of cases, they're not going to give you money just to be really good at coding or really good at maths or to know 20 machine learning algorithms. They're not just going to hand over money just for you to sit in your chair and be super smart. They want you to make them money. They want you to solve their problems. They want you to make them look good. So when you're selling yourself in a CV, and it's the same in an interview, you want to be giving them what you want to be telling them what they want to know, or you want them to be seeing what it is that you can do for them. The fact that you know Python or that you've built a predictive model, that's great. But everyone's saying that. If you go one step further and say that you built a predictive model using Python and you hosted it on AWS, and this is why we did it, and this is what the result was, it's such a simple change, but you've just put yourself at the top of the pile.
100%. A bit of advice on where to start with this, because I think this is probably where a lot of people fall down, is where do I even start? As you say, what information do I include? What do I leave out? I would literally do a brain dump. I would write down all the information that you need to, so that you can visualize the whole project or the piece of work that you did. And this is what we do this actually with our public sector clients. We have to put together evidence, and it has to be within 100 words. So we ask people to basically give us an example of a piece of work that they do, and then we have to go through and pick out words that are unnecessary or try and reshape a sentence so that it's more succinct. I think if you start there, it's much easier to then reduce the content down. And as I say, if you can try and find some examples of what good looks like, whether that's just doing some, I don't know, you can search for some people that work in your industry and find almost entire CVs on LinkedIn profiles. And if you find somebody's that you think is written really well, you can start to try and figure out, okay, how, what kind of language have they used, or what information have they left out, and what have they included, and try and mirror that in your own CV. But yeah, start big and then just try and reduce it down. And I'm sure there are people out there, and you can pay them for their services to help you with CV writing. But the problem with that is if you get somebody else to write your CV, it's going to be really obvious in an interview. I think if you can go through the process and say it might take time and practice to really get the CV to a point where you need it to be, but that cathartic process will, I think, then help you emulate that style of communication in an interview situation. And interviewing is hard. It is a skill. You absolutely should be practicing and doing your dummy sessions with friends and family, because it's nerve-wracking and it is difficult to think on the spot about what pieces of information to include and what not. But again, if you're going into one of these modern data science roles where you're potentially going to be business facing or working with a client, those skills, those softer skills, are as important in a lot of cases nowadays as the technical skills. Is that ability to tell a story from the data, bring it to life, talk to non-technical audiences. And so going through this process of making sure you can do that with your CV and have impact with the information that you choose to include, do that, do a kind of 2, 3, 4 draft process on that, then start practicing, emulating that, in an interview, and you should do well. I think a lot of people probably don't bother with that and end up, throwing themselves into a process cold and do fall down because they haven't practiced what information they should be including in their answers.
Yeah, and I like what you've said there, that you've linked what you say on your CV to how you talk in an interview, because what you were just saying there, and so this idea of star format, or just thinking about three bullet points for a project that you might put on your CV. So what you did, how you did it, and what the results were. So when you go into an interview, you're most likely going to be talking about those same projects, or at least you're going to be asked about some of them. So the tricky thing about interviewing sometimes is remembering what you've done in a project, because you're in an uncomfortable situation. most people find it uncomfortable being in a room with a stranger for an hour and their primary job is to test you. That is a slightly uncomfortable situation sometimes. And I think the best way that I've found to remember what it is I want to talk about is using, say, 3 bullet points for a topic or a project. And those 3 bullet points would be, what did I do? How did I do it? And what were the results? And if I can remember those 3 high-level bullet points, everything else that surrounds those 3 things that were part of the project. So instead of how did I do it, it's how, that was the final way I did it, but I considered these 2 other ways, and this is the reason why I chose option C instead of option A and B. All of those things will just start coming out of my mouth because I've remembered those 3 key steps. So if you think about your CV as your cheat sheet for your interview technique, I think that can work really well. And it even bleeds into the way that you create. So for aspiring data scientists who don't have so much work experience, often we say that you should create yourself a portfolio with projects in it. And I think that should work in the same way. So you want these high level sections. You don't just want to say, I did this and here's the code. That doesn't get you anywhere, because a hiring manager's got anywhere between, say, 5 people and 100 people to look at. And if they go into your portfolio and it's just a bunch of code, they're going to say, that's too hard. I have other things to be doing in my day-to-day job. I need this to be made easy for me. And if you can put it in that same structure, what I did, how I did it, what were the results, and then flesh it out around that, all these things sort of work together at the end of the day. And it makes, if your projects like that, your CVs like that, and your interviewing technique like that, it becomes so much easier for you to talk about these projects in a natural and fluid way.
I 100% agree. And I think, just to add comment to that, it's a highlight reel. You can safely assume that the reader, if it's a specialist recruiter in that market or a hiring manager, they will make certain assumptions and they will connect the dots. So if you're talking about delivering a machine learning model that gave an ROI of 20%, they're going to assume that you have a certain level of technical capability. If you use Python, for example, particularly the hiring manager is going to understand the level of competency required to deliver that type of work. So you don't have to talk about everything, and I think that is just a massive mistake that people make 100% of the time. And as I say, I get it, it's really difficult to pick and choose, but it's your best bits, it's your elevator pitch. And as you say, the rest of it will naturally come out in an interview. You'll be probed on other areas if what you've said really interests them in a particular way. I think another point as well, in terms of how you lay that out, there's, again, starting from scratch is difficult. It's a simple thing. There's loads of really good CV templates online that actually guide you to think about the information that you include. So there's loads of kind of different tools and techniques out there to kind of get you started. And some people, people just add to their CVs every year, and so they actually haven't properly updated the format or the layout in years. And it's, in a busy market like today, you need to be on top of that.
Yeah. So I just want to bring up a question here, and this is from Paul, and Paul's actually one of my Data Science Infinity students. So he's got a really, really interesting background. I won't go into that there, but it's great that he's in the course because I really, really want to work with him on some of the stuff that he's doing. But his question here is, at some point, you have to just take the plunge and start applying for jobs. When is the best time, and how critical is CV structure and having a portfolio?
So what level is Paul at the moment? Is he just as a student?
So Paul has a lot of work experience in other areas. So very interesting areas like I believe it was astrophysics, and like he's going to do some really, really cool stuff. He wants to figure out how to use data science in that area. So he's got a lot of skills in other areas, but he just wants to come into data science and try and get into that market. So a slightly different case than somebody who's coming straight out of university, for example. But I still think selling yourself using, a CV and a portfolio is really useful. I'd almost maybe I think what could be quite useful for this question is to think about, or if you could lend your thoughts, Kate, on, so 2 things here: CV structure, and then I guess having a portfolio versus not having a portfolio, and any thoughts around that. I know they're quite broad questions.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. there's a question I'd like to come back to, or another point I'd like to come back to actually, because it's an interesting one. If Paul, for example, has spent 5 years in academia, or he's spent 5 years in a different type of role and wants to make the move into data science, that's a really great topic that we can tackle as well. But yeah, CV structure, as I mentioned, there are some really good modern CV templates out there that help you to keep the information on maybe 2 pages maximum. Now, I've always said I'm not a massive advocate for a 1-page CV for the sake of it. For the more junior candidates, it works really nicely, but it's the information that's on the CV that's the most important thing, not necessarily keeping it super, super short for the sake of it. So the templates, I think, are really the way to go, because I was reading an article this morning actually about there's a statistic, it's a very old statistic from well over 10 years ago, about the fact that recruiters tend to scan CVs in the space of, I think it's 6.5 seconds. And I will be honest, we have to look at lots of CVs all the time, and it is a visual thing. So the way you present the information is important. Even down to, the size of the font, the type of font, and you can use little visuals to demonstrate your level of competency with particular tools, which is quite nice. So there's loads of little things like that you can do. But there's normally kind of an organic path that your eyes tend to follow when you're scanning a CV, and the information you expect to see. And then I think there are some particularly standard ways that you should lay your CV out so that you can start to build a picture for the reader. So the structure that I would recommend would be certainly to have a short profile, because I do read those. Initially, it tells me hopefully who that person is. The kind of language they're using will tell me how they communicate, if they're using particular words or a particular style, but also the information they choose to include. And I would certainly recommend not just stating who you are and what you do, but talking about where you want to go and what your ambitions are as well. Because quite often, particularly for more junior candidates, if they've only got 1 or 2 jobs under their belt, or even if they're a pure grad, they've got reams of experience to reference. For me, then it's about how they articulate the type of role they want to go into and how specific they're being. So a profile is a really, really good starting point. If there isn't a profile on the CV, I quickly make assumptions about how insular that person might be, how back office they might be. Are they really just interested in the technical aspect of the role? There's nothing about their personality, their softer skills, which again are becoming so important in data science and analytics these days. So I think, profile is really important. This is a tricky one as to where education goes on the CV, and it's not a deal breaker. Don't panic too much if I tell you I think it should be at the top and you decide it fits better at the bottom. It's not that important. But between junior and lead level, so really before you get to management, I am looking to see whether or not you have a degree, or to what level you studied at, what you studied and where you studied. And it's not because I'm being snobby, it's because I need to understand where your theoretical understanding and knowledge of statistics or maths has come from. And that starts to build a picture immediately. And then obviously we come on to career history and the kind of experience that you have. And as I say, these more modern CVs, you tend to have, the kind of visual for the technical tools down one side, and then the actual succinct summary of what somebody's been doing down the right-hand side. And it's easy for me to then scan almost both of those at the same time very quickly. And already I've built up a kind of picture of that person. So I mean, that's taking it literally and talking about the layout of a CV and how I would structure it. But it is important, and it makes you stand out from the crowd, I think, if you really take the time to make it visually look good.
Yep.
So there's a couple of sites. I mean, the only one I've really looked at is, I think you pronounce it Zety, Zety, Zety.com. You do have to pay for the templates. They're super cheap, and I think they're brilliant. I think they're really good templates. So I would go and have a look at that. So I think CV structure is important. And when you're talking about the structure of the content, as we've alluded to so far today, really, really, really important. Structuring your content properly, choosing the information to include is something you should think heavily about. And then going on to the point about having a portfolio, I tend to submit a CV and a covering note once I've interviewed a candidate. If somebody has, for example, written a ton of white papers, it kind of depends what you mean by portfolio. If you've got a whole appendix of extra information that you want to submit alongside your CV, I don't think it would necessarily I don't think people would read it. I think you have to make sure that what you deliver, because people are looking at nowadays at so many different applications, it's got to be short, succinct, and impactful. I think if you're a junior candidate with no work experience, you would almost put that portfolio of any projects that you've done at uni or off your own back, that would be your CV.
Yep.
Having separate cover letters, having separate documents that go into lots of detail about projects that you've done, I haven't got time to read them. I need to know from your CV quickly who you are and what you've done. And I would suggest, please, Andrew, kind of come in with your comments on this, but I would suggest that line managers, especially if businesses at the moment are really focusing on doing direct attraction, they just have not got the time to read reams and reams of information about somebody's, projects that they've done.
Yeah, I agree. So a lot of the time, people who are coming into the industry with no work experience are told that they need to build up a portfolio of projects, and that might be a machine learning project or a data exploration project, or just something to try and sell their skills over and above, the sort of, I guess, slight lack of work experience. But again, I completely agree that the reality is that a lot of hiring managers don't have the time to look at that in depth. So I would almost, if you have a portfolio, I would look at structuring it in a way that doesn't go into a huge amount of depth, or if it does go into a huge amount of depth, have a section at the top which is like an abstract or a summary, which gives the reader everything they need to know straight away. And it's along those lines. It'll be slightly more than what you'd put on your CV. So on your CV, we're saying, you might have 3 sentences. You could have something like a paragraph on your portfolio, which summarizes exactly what you did, and then you can go further into the details, because you don't want to make the process hard for the hiring manager. And it sounds bad, but and it's the same with recruitment. I guess you've got so many CVs to look at. It's a very competitive market. There's a lot of people trying to sell themselves, and a lot of people trying to sell themselves in a very similar way, that as a hiring manager or an interviewer, that if it's made hard for you, if I have to go and work to get the information about what you've done, it sounds bad, but that's what you want to avoid. You want to make things as easy as possible. And from those 3 sentences on your CV, I can almost get a gauge as to whether I'm interested in interviewing you or not, because it's the type of problem that I'm looking to solve in my business. And how you went about it. If you've got enough of those relevant skills and relevant work or experiences, not necessarily work experiences, then I will get a feel as to whether you'd be a good fit from a skills point of view or an experience point of view, just from that. So I wouldn't worry too much about having a really vast portfolio, although I understand that when you don't have specific work experience, you do need to showcase that in some way. But in Data Science Infinity, I talk a lot about building up your brand. And that's not just a portfolio. That can be your LinkedIn profile, or it can be a blog, and it can just be showing people that you're passionate about this industry. Because I think the one thing that sets people apart from obviously having the base skills which you need for the role. So if the role needs you to be programming, you need to know some programming language. But above that, the one thing that I talk about a lot, and the one thing I think is so important, is showing that you have a genuine passion for either the types of projects that you're working on or the company that you want to be working for, because that shines through so much more than a stack load of portfolio projects where you've just done it for the sake of building up a portfolio. If you can show that passion, that genuinely shines through, and as a hiring manager or as an interviewer, you can see how this person is going to grow into this amazing person who's going to add value to your team or to your business.
I've got a specific example, if I may. And just to clarify, I certainly wasn't undermining the value of going out and being proactive and building up this portfolio of projects. 100%, same as you, Andrew, would encourage that. I think if especially if you're coming in as a grad, as I say, or somebody that's maybe spent some years outside of this industry and is looking to make the transition, you want to frame those projects, whether they've been paid for or not, whether it's an internship, whether it's voluntary, as work experience. And so you would write, exactly as you say, you would write about them as if they were a job on your CV. And there's a guy that we placed recently. He was, I think he, from memory, had about 2.5-3 years experience in total. And he was working for a business when he left and moved to our client. But he was such a great quality candidate because he'd managed to demonstrate how he was entrepreneurial. So he talked about it was like a little mini company he'd set up with a couple of friends from university, so their own voluntary kind of data science consultancy they'd set up, and they'd managed to secure some work, a project with a huge oil company. And he just talked about what they delivered and the ROI that it had in exactly the same way that he talked about his current role, where he was being paid to be there and was doing similar kind of work. So there was that, and then there was something else that you put in there. I think it was another voluntary project that he'd done whilst he was at university. It may have even been a formal internship. And then, yes, he talked in his interests section about, really enjoys kind of reading up about data science and learning about data science in his spare time. Because the role that he was in, that we pulled him out from, was actually more of a kind of reporting insights analyst position, and he was desperate to get into data science, and he'd studied data science at master's level and I think done maths and stats at degree level. So he himself was trying to make that transition into something a bit more advanced. And as I say, he'd gone above and beyond, and he'd gone out and kind of created opportunities for himself. And I just loved that. It told me so much about him as an individual, and it differentiated him from all the other graduates and all the other junior analysts that we talked to. And I'm not saying it's easy, and not everybody, has that opportunity. But you can go and, I don't know, enter into a Kaggle competition, for example, put that on the CV, talk about the particular project that you entered or the test that you did, whatever it might have been. And again, it's just being able to frame it as brief, what you did, and then the kind of solution that you delivered. You can still absolutely use that information, use that experience to build a picture of who you are and what your kind of key strengths are. Yep. But yeah, just use the same kind of format and rules that we've been talking about in terms of the information that you include and how much of it. But yeah, it's a fantastic idea, and it is 100% the way to go if you're looking to enter into this market from scratch.
I agree that it is, again, it aligns exactly with what I say when I talk about it, which is, so a lot of the time when you're building up a portfolio and you don't have any experience, maybe you're using like Kaggle, for example, or you're using some test data sets which you found online. And I agree completely with what you've said there. Don't just frame that as, so the classic machine learning sort of starter one is predicting who will survive on the Titanic with the Titanic data set. So you could do that, and that could be a project in your portfolio, and you'd be the same as everybody else. But if you frame that problem as a genuine business problem, and it sounds a little bit silly, right? If you frame that as not predict who will survive on the Titanic, if you frame that slightly differently in the way that a business problem would be framed. So say you think of yourself as working for a luxury shipping company, and they need to know what are the key indicators of who might survive or not survive in case of an emergency. And you frame that whole problem from inception right through the work that you do to the conclusion or to the sort of implementation of what that is going to mean for the business. And it sounds a bit silly taking a made up problem and turning it into a real problem. But all it means is you're structuring that in a way that when you talk about it, you're going to be ticking all of the boxes that a hiring manager is looking for in terms of the way that this person addresses a problem, the way they think about possible solutions to that problem, and they pick the appropriate solution, not just the most complex solution, and the way that they focus on what the results actually mean. So with the Titanic one, you would, in the vanilla example, you just get an accuracy score, a prediction accuracy score. That doesn't tell me anything as a hiring manager. But if you say, what does this prediction accuracy score mean in terms of the problem that you're trying to solve, which you've framed at the start, I still see that you're using a made-up data set, but I see that you're being creative with the data, and you're thinking about different solutions, and you're thinking about why solution B is better than solution A, and what considerations you made, and you're showing me that you're thinking about the impact that's going to have on the business, and that's everything I need to know. The reality is, when you come into an interview, or you're interviewing for a new role, nobody that's interviewing for that role is going to walk straight into that role and just know exactly how everything works. Everyone's going to have to upskill and learn, because they might be using AWS and you've been using AWS in your last role, but they're going to be doing it differently, or they're going to be using different parts of it, or their data's different and it's going to be feeding in differently, whatever it may be. So I almost don't care so much that you've used this exact thing before. I want to see that you're thinking about the way to solve problems, and I want to see that you're thinking about growing, and I want to see that you're passionate about solving these problems. And if you do that, and this is how I interview and how I look for candidates when I've been interviewing, but that's so much more important than having a list of skills that you've done in the past, because everyone's going to have to learn in the new role. So if I can get somebody who's passionate to learn and is showing me that they think about things in the right way, that supersedes everything else for me.
Yeah, the best clients the clients we have the most success with are the clients that approach their recruitment in that way as well. And I do think that, it's part of our job as well to educate our clients to the potential candidates that they have access to, and we do get briefs that are incredibly rigid sometimes, and it's so frustrating because we do have to turn away really good quality candidates who don't quite fit the exact brief that we've been given. But the way that we work, because it means that we are able to help more people, is to, as I say, try and educate those clients to actually, you could be getting a better quality person into that position if you just loosen some of those expectations a little bit. And I always approach all of my briefs with that in mind. It's about the quality of the individual, and it's the sum of their experience. It's not just where did you study, what did you study. It's then again, how did you apply that throughout your career? Have you talked about that when I've interviewed you? And again, as you say, it's this ability to apply those theoretical learnings in a business environment. So I think for a lot of you guys out there that are applying for jobs and job hunting, whether you're right at the beginning of your career or whether you're kind of midway through, it is it's recognizing the skills that are important to particular clients, and really self-assessing and making sure that you are the right person for that as well, because there are so many different types of data scientist roles out there. And we are, I think, particularly talking about those that are there to solve problems, and that can be through building different products and tools, through a bit of R&D, but it's that mindset that's required. But I do know lots of businesses that hire, data scientists that are there to do a very prescriptive job, and some people are quite happy with that. So understanding the brief and understanding the client's expectations as well is really key, and aligning your CV and application to that particular part of the market or particular brand, because there are certainly going to be those that have a higher bar than others in lots of different areas.
And you've just mentioned brand, and we touched on a little bit before. There is a question that's come through. I'll bring it up here from Seba. So he said, as you said, make yourself a brand, and this could help you telling the things that could be done for. So can you tell us the things to be done for this? So I guess from my perspective, so part of why a brand is important, and brand is a very broad word, I suppose, but it is possible to win over a recruiter or a hiring manager before you've even spoken to them. So I guess, and you can kind of confirm this, you'll know more than I, but from an interviewer point of view, everyone that's coming into interview, I don't know this person. So if I can see some things about them online, about their brand, I think that can be quite powerful. And I personally put your CV as part of your brand. But outside of your CV, I think LinkedIn is quite powerful. Networking is quite powerful. But even simpler things than that I think, I guess, if I was to frame it another way, don't give a recruiter or a hiring manager a reason to consciously or subconsciously dismiss you for any reason. Because you might be amazing for this role, but if there's some reason, like you have an awful profile picture, or you don't have a profile picture, or these tiny little things that you can make a change to, that means that they won't form any subconscious bias, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with humans in a human-led process, and there are biases, and that's not, nobody's to blame for that. We're humans, and we try our best not to have biases, but don't let any subconscious negative bias creep in. So, Kate, are there any things that you can think of that people can do or maybe not do in terms of their brand, and maybe on LinkedIn? So I just mentioned the profile picture thing. Is that something that can help you, or maybe pushes you away from people and towards other people?
Absolutely. I actually, funnily enough, did a video on this over lockdown, which is all around how to optimize your LinkedIn profile, because there's the easy apply function that you can use. So you don't have to use a CV. You can actually use your LinkedIn profile. And I don't necessarily, it kind of depends how visible or not you want to be on the market, because it is a saturated platform, when it comes to recruiters. Most recruiters treat it as a CV database these days. So it is quite over canvas. But I would say that your LinkedIn profile should be a slightly watered down version of your CV. I probably wouldn't recommend putting in all the information. But I mean, there have been occasions where I've been looking at a candidate's CV and I've just not been able to make up my mind, or it's just been slightly too busy, or it's been the end of the day and I'm knackered, and I just, I've looked at 100 CVs already and I can't quite make a decision. And I always do this anyway with any candidate that I put forward for a job or that I interview. Every CV that I have come through that I think looks potentially useful for us, useful for our clients, relevant, I always cross-reference with LinkedIn. It's the first thing I do before I even cross-reference with my own database. I go straight to LinkedIn, because, as I say, most people will put a kind of watered down version of their CV on there, and it's a really quick reference point visually. And I have made decisions based on somebody's LinkedIn profile. So I may have looked at it and it's just a slightly more succinct version, and it's just enabled me to make a quick decision. Or they might have put something on their LinkedIn profile that they haven't put on the CV. So people again tend to summarize their whole career in one kind of, in like the profile section, or they might even talk a bit more personally about what their interests are, or some training they've been doing or something like that. And it's just a secondary reference point, and it really helps again to build a picture of that person. And yes, you're talking about a personal brand. I don't know why people don't, there's really many reasons why people don't put a profile picture on LinkedIn. And I've spoken to some candidates in the past who have done experiments with regards to including photos on their CVs and not. And there's lots of questions that come up around discrimination or subconscious bias. And that's a whole another topic, a whole another chat. But I think it's important to own it, to put your profile picture on there so that I can see who you are. There's some really funny ones that stand out in my mind over the years. There's a guy who's got a picture of himself with this huge white dog, and it's just fun, and you want to talk to this guy. He looks like, if you find out a bit more about the dog, but it just kind of brings a little bit of a light touch to what can be quite an arduous and sometimes really disappointing process. Job hunting is difficult at the moment, so and reading hundreds of CVs every day can become a little bit tiring. So it's nice to have something else to refer to. And I just think, especially if you are actively out there, you've got to take this seriously. And I would absolutely take advantage of all the tools that LinkedIn offers for job seekers as well. So you can put a badge on your profile picture saying open to work and things like that. But yeah, I think take time. Again, if you're stuck for ideas, just have a look at other people in the industry that you admire, that you're connected to, or even just friends, and you'll soon spider off into the network and start, you'll find yourself looking at people's profiles you've never even looked at before and getting new ideas. And it's I think a nice kind of motivational activity and piece of work to do at the beginning of a job search anyways, to get everything properly set up so you're really proud of it. You've got good content out there, because you'd never know who's going to be looking. So I think if you're taking a sloppy approach to these kind of things and you just don't bother to really fill out the profile properly, again, people are going to judge. People are going to make an assumption that that's reflective of you. So I do think it's really key to make sure the profile is really well populated. And as I say, there's a video on just some little hints and tips actually as well on how to make sure it's optimized for search. And I think my colleague Colin has done one that's at least one or maybe even two that's quite detailed. So so I think that's important. But as well, going back to the CV, and this guy that I mentioned earlier is a really great example. I think a good starting point, particularly from like a personal brand perspective, is again, this is not just about what you've studied and how many different machine learning techniques you know. This is about you. And if you can try and think about the like your best qualities from like a softer skill perspective or like an attitudinal perspective, you know, are you entrepreneurial? Are you creative? You know, you can be creative and work in data. Are you a problem solver? Are you curious? Do you like to innovate and research? You know, it's all these kind of extra things. So think about all of those things, make a list, and then think about how you're going to illustrate that on a CV. And are there different ways that you can illustrate that beyond just using the written word? Can you use, you know, a visual for your technical skills? And then, I mean, I'm not a massive advocate for pictures on a CV, but quite often people put their hobbies as pictures, and that's quite nice. That works quite nicely. It's just, you've then got almost different textures to the CV. And again, it kind of shows that, you know, you've thought about it and you've decided to do something a bit different. And that it immediately tells you something about that person. So you're right. I think there's a subconscious bias in the way that people digest information and make assumptions about people, and you absolutely have to take that human element in, or try and take that human element into account when you're putting stuff out there into the ether.
Yeah, the human element is a big part of it too. And I just add to the LinkedIn part of it. So there's your brand in terms of your profile and your profile picture, and then there's, I guess, your brand in terms of how you're posting and what you're sharing, and building yourself up within the data community as well. And I think that can be quite important, not only because it can show people that you're looking to learn or you're willing to be part of a wider audience, but that also, you know, you can showcase that you are a positive person or that you're an inclusive person. You can showcase how you talk about things. So there's a LinkedIn, like any social media or social network, is prone to a lot of negativity. And if I was looking at a candidate and I happen to see a sort of a very negative comment about them, I would no, I don't want that person in my team. You could be the smartest person, but if I can see that you belittle another person's idea, or that you say that somebody else is wrong and you're right when there's more to the story than that, then that's the last thing I want in a team of people all working towards the same goal. So whenever you're building up your brand and sharing content or commenting on other people's posts, show that you're positive and show that you're inclusive, because I think that positiveness and that positive energy is only going to help you in the long run. So you put out positivity and you'll get positivity back in terms of people seeing that and thinking that you're somebody that they want to spend time with. Because the human element thing you just mentioned, that's a big part of interviewing as well. So there's the whole part about the technical skill set, and you know, this person meets the requirements for the role. But as an interviewer or as a team member who's helping in the interview process, if you're part of your decision is understanding that I have to sit next to this person 5 days a week. Well, not at the moment, but 5 days a week, this person's going to be sitting next to me, talking to me, being part of the team that's all working towards a greater goal. I want to know that I want to be working with this person, and that this person's a team player, and this person's positive, and that they've got the right attitude. So don't underestimate the human element. Always go into an interview with a really positive attitude. Don't be negative towards past employers or past projects. Always be positive, and I guarantee that will help you in the long run.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of interview advice 101, isn't it? I think. But yeah, and I think, you know, we don't do it. I don't think direct employers go around checking Instagram feeds and Facebook feeds and stuff like that anymore. But yeah, the content you put out on LinkedIn, whether you're sharing information, liking other people's posts, commenting, I think you can be strategic about that, absolutely. And that's a whole nother level of kind of personal brand building, and we've done some training on that, and there's some people out there that give amazing advice, but it takes a lot of time. But I think it's worth, you know, if you're active on LinkedIn, if you're kind of using that as your main job searching platform, you can do some useful things like making sure you're following key industry leaders that like to self-promote and are likely to kind of follow you back or comment on stuff that you're putting out there, because networking is invaluable these days, and in a community like the data science community, you just never know who you're going to meet or what you're going to pick up. You might have a conversation with somebody about something and you can then reference that in an interview. I think that interacting with the community is really key, but making sure you're clear on what you want to get out of that as a job seeker and what image you want to present is probably something to definitely take a step back and think about before you just dive straight in, because you don't want to make a mistake and alienate the people that could ultimately be your next employer.
Yeah. And there's a lot of opportunities that come from networking. It's a slow process. So you start following one person and they follow you back, and then you follow another person. You might not think that that's going to get you any opportunities, but if you do this enough and you network with people and you comment on people's posts, you never know where that's going to get you. The opportunities that can come from building up a network are huge, and I want people to know that don't underestimate that. Post on LinkedIn, try and post daily about something that you've learned or a question that you have. That these are the sort of things that will build up your network, show people that you're willing to learn, show people that you've got a positive attitude. And I think they're more impactful than people might give them credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about being visible, and again, particularly for you guys that are graduates or postgrads early on in your career, a piece of advice I would give when you're job hunting is to make sure that you talk to as many recruiters as you can that specialize in that space, because particularly with junior level positions, graduate roles, and I'm sure the same goes for the internal talent teams that run the graduate schemes, they're going to be inundated with applications, and I'm afraid it is all about making yourself stand out from the crowd. So when I have 200 applications for a graduate or junior data scientist position that I've advertised, the 2 or 3 people that actually choose to pick up the phone and ring me to reinforce their application, even if it isn't spot on, they are then front of mind for either when the next role comes along that is suitable, or they might convince me otherwise. I may have been about to dismiss the CV for whatever reason, but if they are able to demonstrate verbally, that they are the right character fit, and I say to them, well, actually, you didn't include this on your CV. Okay, I'll go away and work on it, and they take that feedback on. You never know what you're going to get out of a conversation as well. And I think going the extra mile and taking those extra steps is really key. And you can get, hopefully some good advice direct from recruiters as well. So that's a great tip. It's so easy, I think, to just become mired in the internet, when you're job searching and you're trying to kind of do all of these different things. It's a lot of work, but a good old fashioned conversation with a recruiter, a local recruiter that you can build a relationship with, is also invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly it. It loops back to the it loops back to the start where I mentioned why I started my LinkedIn Lives by talking to you, because I think there's so much value that can be gained from somebody who's in the field, knows the field so well, and can give people this advice. Because I know because I get messages in my inbox all the time. People are asking these questions. They're unsure. They want to progress their career, but they don't feel confident in the way that they're going about it, because there's no sort of feedback loop a lot of the time, and they feel like they're going in there blind. And getting advice like this from you, I think, is going to be absolutely invaluable. So I'm really, really happy that I've had you on. I think we should probably wrap up. We've gone almost an hour and 10 minutes now, so that's a pretty good session, I think.
Yeah, great.
And we've had some really great questions. I haven't been able to get to them all, but I know that a lot of them were being covered by what we were talking about anyway, so sorry if I didn't get to your questions. But yeah, one thing before we wrap up, I wanted to give you a chance to tell people how they can get in touch with you, and also how they can find your videos.
Thank you. Yes. So if you want to get in touch with me about your job search or job vacancies, really easy. You can email me at kate@bluepelican.com. We do have all our live vacancies posted on our website. Because of the pandemic, being really honest, we are a lot quieter than usual. So the best way that I'm able to help most people at the moment is through providing advice through platforms like this. And as you just mentioned, Andrew, we've got a YouTube channel where myself and my colleague Colin have been recording lots of videos, all focused pretty much on helping candidates with their job search. So because I'm super busy focusing on lots of business development and canvassing at the moment. The first port of call, I think, for you guys, if you have got a need for any further advice, would be the YouTube channel, and I'll send a link actually to you, Andrew, if that's actually it's on my LinkedIn profile, guys. So you can go to my LinkedIn profile and you'll find a link to the YouTube channel there. That would be the first port of call, because I'm really swamped at the moment. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver and promise that I'm going to come back to every single person that emails me. But yeah, so start there. But if you have got any specific questions that I can help with that aren't answered through the through the YouTube channel, then please just pop me an email and I'll come back to you as soon as possible. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Oh, it looks like Colin has just posted the YouTube channel in the comments as well. There you go. Your colleagues have got you back.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kate. That's been very, very awesome. We've got some comments here saying thanks for the session. This was an amazing session. Thanks for both of you. So I'm really happy that we did this, and it fits with what I'm trying to do with these LinkedIn Lives, which is really help you guys feel more confident moving forward in your career. So I will be looking to do more of these sessions. So I can't wait for that. But again, thank you very much, Kate. And I will talk to you very soon.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
See you later. Thank you.